Hello, and welcome to Season 5 of Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected. I'm your host, Folasade Ologundudu, and on the show, I'll share the interesting and inspiring stories of artists, critical thinkers, thought leaders, and art professionals on a wide range of topics about life, work, society, success and failure, and the ways in which we navigate life. We talk about our inspirations, concerns, and the ideas that motivate and propel us to create. Much of the show centers on visual arts and its pervasiveness in our society, how culture shapes our lives, and the responsibility of artists and curators not only to be truth tellers, but to advocate for and care for the massive impact that culture plays in our lives, from the things we believe in to the ways in which we understand ourselves. As I travel to art fairs, gallery openings, and events within the creative industries, both in the U.S. and abroad, join me in discovering and learning about some of today's most interesting and dynamic artists and creative professionals. If you're new to the show, I'm glad to have you here. If you've been on this journey with me for a while, welcome back. Let's get it. On this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Rashaad Newsome as we discuss Assembly. The documentary released earlier this year uncovers the personal moments and many events that led up to and inspired the creation of his installation at the Park Avenue Armory in 2022. Assembly ran for just over 2 weeks, and if you missed it, then you missed it. Short performances tend to fill up quickly. Tickets generally are hard to come by. Luckily, I got a ticket from my Art Noir family during one of the final performances, and I was completely blown away by the immersive world that Rashaad creates within his practice. Big shout outs to my Art Noir fam for the ticket and for all of the incredible work that they're doing. One of the things I loved most about Assembly were the dances and spoken word performances, the moments that felt most participatory in bringing in other artists and communities to be a part of the world that Rashaad has built. The documentary reveals in a very honest and straightforward way that hones in on how captivating personal stories are, the story of how Rashaad came to create Assembly, and many of the important moments that led up to the performance series. In this episode, Rashaad and I discuss the personal aspects of the film, including his family history, personal struggles, and his experience as a Black queer artist. Dr. Rashaad Newsome's work blends several practices, including filmmaking, animation, robotics, collage, sculpture, photography, music, writing, AI, community organizing, and performance, to explore the intersections of these mediums and challenge traditional narratives and techniques. Dr. Rashaad Newsome is truly a pioneer in his own right. He's continuing to expand on the conventions and the canons of art, of performance, of sculpture, of collage. He's breaking new ground and breaking down barriers through the work that he creates and the narrative story that he tells through that work. Drawing inspiration from diasporic traditions of improvisation, Rashaad incorporates elements from advertising, the internet, art history, and Black and queer culture to produce counter-hegemonic works that oscillate between social practice and abstraction. Let's dive into my next episode with the one and only Dr. Rashaad Newsome. Rashaad Newsome, I'm so happy to have you join me on an episode of Everything is Connected. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you today and talking more about your film Assembly.
The first time I remember seeing your work was in 2022 at the Park Avenue Armory. This film chronicles that work. It also digs into the deep story of your personal life, your history, your family, things that are very close to you, and also the way that you think about building community and building bridges and building worlds. Can you speak a little bit about bringing in the personal elements into the film as integral to the story?
Yeah, I really wanted to share my story. I feel like so many people know my work and they know like the spectacle of it and everything, but they don't know like all of the work that goes into what you see on the stage or in the gallery, etc. And then also as an artist who doesn't only work with inanimate objects, there's all these people that show up in the work, and then knowing their stories and like the depth of those relationships. And so it was a really, I felt like that was really important to show. And with any good storytelling, you gotta be vulnerable and let people in. And so it was an opportunity to really let people see me and my life and where I come from. And then also, and I was asking that of my performers, so I obviously had to do it too. And so it was yeah, it was a good exercise. And also there was an aspect to it too where like people have an impression of you, but when you sort of become the author of your own story, then you can really tell your story, which was because people can say everything about you, but what they can't do is tell your story.
Right. Only you can do that.
Yeah.
And when you take the agency to do that, then you sort of reclaim your power, right? You reclaim your narrative, reclaim your autonomy as an individual person.
Reclaim your time.
Right? Reclaim your time. Exactly. And I love that you ground in that, and that's kind of the starting point, because I think one of the things that came up for me was at the beginning of the film, the opening scene is an animated scene of the transatlantic slave trade. And so you see something that is the impetus of maybe where the story will take you, what the story will be about. I thought it was a really interesting starting point. Can you speak a little bit about why that was a decision that you made to really open the film with?
Yeah, it was so one thing I really love genre filmmaking, like all types of movies, like sci-fi, horror, superhero, all this kind of stuff. And like I have a really strong background in visual effects, and I run my own visual effects studio inside of my art practice studio. And so it was really an opportunity for me to kind of put my work in the film. I didn't want the film, so often films about artists are like, they don't offer much in the way of craft sometimes. And I really wanted to imbue this film with a lot of craft, the same amount of craft that you would see in like an object in the show or something like that. And so, that started with, okay, well, we will ground it in documentary. With my co-director was really integral to that, Johnny Simons, because he's like a very decorated documentary filmmaking maker. And so it kind of gave us that kind of scaffolding, but then I knew I wanted to kind of use that as a jumping off point to play with things like Black interiority. When you think about Toni Morrison and so many folks who...
Saidiya
Hartman, who actually was in conversation with me during the show. And so just having that...
During the run of the show at the Park Avenue Armory.
Yeah, we did a panel, and it was like me, Saidiya, Ruha Benjamin, one of my mentors, Arthur Jaffa, and the public programs curator, Tavia Nyong'o.
Some of the greats.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. So it was just a way to play with this whole idea of interiority. And like, as an artist, you see films about artists, and it's like they're just talking to you about their ideas, but like I wanted to take people into my head. Right. And so whenever I could break the surface of that documentary grounding, I did it. And so I wanted to start the film with that so that you knew what kind of story we were telling. And so when I'm swimming and I come up and you see that, it's sort of like, okay, I wanted the film to start off like, what kind of movie is this? Like, is this like a horror movie? Is this like, it's just like, and so, and also it allowed me to kind of establish from the gate, like, these are the people whose shoulders everybody you're going to meet in the story is standing on. Sometimes I feel like in the Black queer community, you have to separate your Blackness from your queerness, and I wanted to really have all those things be happening in this film in concert. So when you see me sort of struggling with isolation in rural Louisiana, and you see Nakia struggling with being, a 6'3" Black trans woman in New York, or Chiron with sexual assault in like a Caribbean family that is not super accepting of his, sexual identity, and some of the other folks, but we all work through it together. That strength that we have on top of, the trauma comes from that person who got kicked off that boat.
Right.
And then at the end of the film, you see her again. and she's not on the boat. She's back in Africa, and she's like looking like a queen. And so it's just sort of showing how we can, we come from people who have endured a lot, and to just kind of remind us of all about where we come from.
Yeah. I feel like there's so many jumping off points, and we could go in so many directions. But one of the things that I want to think about is also some of the preceding scenes that came up in the film where you're engaging the audience in a very personal moment of your father's passing and being in the church. And just, if I say the Black church, I think a lot of people have different ideas about what that means, but it means a lot. And it means a lot of different things to different folks depending on where you are. But I think to speak about Black people and queer Black people specifically having to separate their Blackness from their queerness, and then thinking about the Black church as a space that should be, that one would hope is a space of refuge and respite, but often can be a place of a lot of contention for the Black queer community because of some of the beliefs that come out of Christianity that don't align with being queer. How do you think about that?
Yeah, it's definitely not been a safe space for me, and so but it's really fraught, right? Because it's also like in the movie you see how deeply connected me and my mother are, and like that has been a safe space for her. And so you kind of have to sort of meet people where they are, And so it's always about kind of finding that line between like respecting yourself and setting boundaries, but also being open to where other people are and respecting them and their boundaries, but not in a way that is somehow like somehow putting you in a bad way, right? So yeah, it's just always this sort of dance. And for me, that was a particularly fraught scene because and also that's a church in Booty, Louisiana. That's a church I went to as a kid. I vividly remember this woman named what's her name? Miss I think her name was Miss Doreen, and she would just catch the Holy Ghost like every Sunday. And as a little kid, I would just be there like so fascinated with her. Like she would just be falling out and going crazy. And so I feel like in some ways she's seared into my brain because when I remember her going off like that in the church, it's so akin to what you see on the stage.
Yes.
And so that kind of euphoria, that kind of that comes from just like, or that kind of that kind of like transporting yourself through that euphoria of fellowship, which I think is also within Black community, like Black queer community spaces, like particularly like ballroom and many other spaces where people fellowship. And at the end, that's what it's all about, right? It's like all of us coming together and sharing energy. It just happens in different forms. But, that's the church I grew up in. All the people from my family go there, and I'm there for my father's funeral, and like a lot of those people I haven't seen in many years, and so I'm there in the fullness of who I am. So it was kind of nervous to get up there, but I knew that through my beloved bell hooks and quoting her that like I could hold that space and deliver a message. That's why I kept saying love. It was really about like, we're all here and we're family and we love each other. That's what we're going to do right now. Right. We've lost somebody and we're going to love each other through that. Nothing else really matters.
That thread of love is through the entire film in the ways that you talk to the cast, in the ways that you talk to the people that you're collaborating with, that you're in deep partnership with. And I was having an interesting conversation with Rashaad Johnson not too long ago. And we were speaking about the notion of Black interiority, which you just mentioned. And he said something that I thought was really interesting, which was like, because as a people we've been through so much, it's like he was riffing on the fact that it's like when I see another Black person out in the world, I love on them. I see them and I look at them like, I'm paraphrasing, but as my brother, as my sister, as family. I love on them more than I would love on anyone else because I see someone who is akin to me. There's a shared experience that we may have because of how we walk through the world. And I wonder, and so that thought of Black love and the way we love ourselves, but also the difficulty with doing that in conditions in which you live, where the world that you're living in, the society that you're living in is not built for your survival. It's not built for you to thrive, right? How do you think about love entering in and being sort of maybe a conduit for all that you do with your practice?
Yeah, I think that it's definitely within the medium or within the strategy um, of me making my work. I think about like just like the hermeneutics of care and how much that is a part of the kind of work that I do, because often I'm not dealing with people who are like, classically trained performers.
Right.
I'm really interested in like underground Black culture and sort of like, I don't want to say the word elevating it because it implies that it's some kind of like it's somehow lower, but celebrating some of the things that we have created, the institutions we have created, as much as I am showing in like these Eurocentric white institutions, right? And so there needs to be, you have to lead that with love, because there's going to be imposter syndrome, there's going to be fear, there's going to be people who are not showing up as their best self. And like, if you want the realness, the rawness, the essence of something a very particular cultural experience, if you don't love it, you'll just be like, okay, because you can just take another route, right? But it's a labor of love if you want that really true raw thing, because it may not be easy to work with. Right. As an artist, you're trying to exploit every medium to its like limit, right? So if it's wood or marble or whatever, people can be that way too. Mm-hmm. And so I think in these many years of working with performers, I just realize how whenever somebody is standing in front of you, you're experiencing not just what's in front of you right now, but everything that led to them standing in front of you. And once you really understand that, you can not take things personal, and you could have a lot of grace and compassion. And I think that's what people were seeing in the film, because that's really what it takes to make that kind of work.
Right.
I don't think anybody can make the work that I make.
Only you can make the work that you
I really believe that. I don't think that people, it just there's so much patience that it takes, and like stuff that has nothing to do with like making the work, as it were, right?
It's part of making the work.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's another thing that's interesting to riff on the fact that like there are things that a person does as a creative, and people use that term often, but there are times when you're not doing something that's specifically tied to making the work, but it deeply informs how the work gets made.
Yeah.
That can be going for a walk. That can be swimming. That it can be an activity. It can be an experience that you have. It could be anything. The point is, it's not always about the making of the work that leads you to it. Mm-hmm. It's like living, mm-hmm. right?
It's the relationships. You got to get people. You want people to trust you, to trust your vision. Mm-hmm. That saying, like, you can't be what you're not.
Sure.
And so you have to be that thing that you want them to show up as.
And you also can't not be what you are.
Yeah.
Right. So like, if you come to the world as is, you cannot deny that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're going to be denying yourself that entire time.
Yeah.
Right?
So when I say like stuff that's not the work, like you said, like a walk or something, sometimes that means just like not doing the work and just dealing, like, for instance, there's a performance that's pretty well known that I do called Shade Compositions. That's usually with about 25 Black women in films who perform these gestures that are seen as sassy and stereotypical of the Black community, but we transform it into this minimalist piece of music. And so I did that piece in, it was in Pittsburgh. And this was kind of around the height of a lot of conversations around Me Too. And we were thinking about that collectively in the rehearsals. And so we were thinking about like sexual assault to women. And it started this conversation. And so, when I was growing up, like, we were like a tribe, because my mom had 12 brothers and sisters. So all my cousins were my friends growing up. Right. I didn't really need to have friends, right? And it was all boys. So I only had like one female cousin. Her name was Myrtle. Shout out to Myrtle. But and there was just no sexual abuse in the family. But as an adult gay man who has a lot of female friends, I know so many women who have been sexually assaulted.
It's very common.
It's really staggering, right? And so we were kind of talking about that in rehearsal, and then I just asked, like, oh, has anybody, and so many people raised their hands. And then there was one woman who had experienced it fairly recently. Mm-hmm. And so, that brought up a lot for people. And then, people cried, and so it was a moment where it wasn't even about the rehearsal anymore. It was more about a circle of energy and how can we like, you know, help each other heal, and how can we transform what had been experienced into something in the work that can help other people. And we came up with this sixth act in the piece that was super powerful. And like, yeah, at some point I will release the video from that. But it was, yeah, it was great. It was like the whole act, every section was saying variations on the word no.
I see.
And it built up into this like really intense moment in the piece. Yeah.
I want to, as you're describing that, I kind of want to go back to something that you said earlier, which was about artists pushing artistic mediums to their limits.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to ask about your tendency and something that seems to be a grounding part of your practice, which is to engage with technology and to engage within it potentially to its limits. How far can you push it? What can you do? I also want to talk about the fact that since assembly took place in 2022, you've since received your doctorate. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Right. So it's Dr. Rashaad Newsome. Let me not get it twisted. But in saying that, and in thinking about pushing yourself educationally, pushing yourself in terms of your academic and scholarly pursuits, and then thinking about technology, can you speak a bit about why using technology the way that you do specifically has been interesting to you, and why you sort of have gravitated towards it as an artist?
Well, so many different ways. One is we were seen as technology when we arrived here.
Which you say in the film.
Yeah.
Frankly.
So we are so connected to technology in that way. And it just really irritates me when people kind of make these like wild assumptions that somehow Black people are not connected to technology. You know, there's with the work that I've been doing with being the digital griot and stuff like that. And you see that critique in the film. Yeah. I think at one point,
the young woman who stands up and says,
she says like
AI.
People who have access to technology and people who don't. Black people have access to technology, and a lot of the like all the Siris and all of the Alexas, so much of that is outsourced to Black folks in West Africa and so many different parts of Africa. So it's like there's this assumption like we are not engaged in this conversation around technology, and we really are. And so that just kind of irritates me and makes me want to work with it more, but also to not be like a bystander who's just standing on the side whinging about the problems. Like the critique around AI is not unfounded. Like, yeah, it's definitely it will be problematic, but we have to get in the game, you know? And so I have the technical ability and the will to do it, and so I'm doing it. And so that's one thing. But just as a medium, just formally, I love the idea of a medium that like kind of has no limits. You know, it's really as far as your mind can go. There's no material quality to it. Right. It's really about ideas and like in engineering and what can you make.
Which also seems very much akin to possibly the psychology of being a Black person in this world, of being, I mean, if you just think about where we were 400 years ago, and you think about a Black body, a Black person in this society, and what were they thinking about subconsciously and consciously in order to move through? How did we arrive to be where we are right now? Somebody had to think of it.
We were the engineers of ourselves.
Exactly. So that engineering and that world building has been something that we've been doing. I'm sure we could say that forever, right? Not just within the context of being kidnapped and brought here and that part of it, but also just as a people.
Yeah, I mean, that's where what I was sort of getting at with that whole idea of like we've always been engaged in a conversation around technology because we have had to engineers ourselves, you know, arriving here, not knowing where we come from, people calling us Black, but you know, we didn't really collectively decide that that's what we were, and then having to figure out what that was in real time, and then trying to navigate, you know, a white racist world, and still doing that. To some extent, not to some extent, to still doing that. And then also just thinking about like a lot of those objects that show up in the work and how these things are looked at as primitive, but these were objects that people would use to predict certain things that would happen in the future that would affect the community. So that's like predictive analytics, you know, or like time machines, dare I say, where the priest would travel to another space to like get counsel from someone else to help someone in this reality deal with what they were dealing with. And so we have always been engaged in technology, but in a much more broader and nuanced idea of it. You know, what quote unquote magic is technology.
Right.
You know,
Right.
Science is technology, and we've always, from the medicines to the rituals to the objects and to the general just sort of improvisation we've had to do in becoming.
Yes.
Yeah.
As we wrap the episode, just want to talk a little bit more about the film. So you originally, or maybe can you share with me about the premiere and kind of how that happened? So it was originally premiered at South by Southwest
Yes.
earlier this year.
Mm-hmm.
And have you premiered it here in New York yet? Or is that
Yes. Yeah, we premiered on June 1st.
Okay.
With New Fest Pride Film Festival. And it was the first time we got to see it all together, the cast and crew, and we had a huge celebration. We turned the Boom Boom Room on top of the Standard into like a little Black queer juke joint.
I love it.
And
It was been fun.
we had and so over the years I've worked with so many young Black queer performers who have, you know, become really prominent. So it was almost like a little bit of a Rashaad Newsome studio alum kind of reunion. So we had like Cakes Tequila, Controverse, some of the folks from the film, Chiron, who sings in the film, several dancers who were in the performance and who had a dance for me before, DJs that I work with, like Mike Q, and then like even new people like Jazz J, who's also from New Orleans. So we got Katie Red, who is like an iconic bounce music artist who I've worked with multiple times. Me, her, and Solange have collaborated in the past. So yeah, it was really a really special premiere here.
I love that. Final question before we round out. If there's anything that you would hope folks take away from Assembly, from the film, from being able to engage with your work a little bit more deeply, what would that be?
That we are stronger together. We have to figure out how to be here together. Black people ain't going nowhere. Queer people ain't going nowhere. All the other races ain't going nowhere. Right. We're all here, and the only way we're going to get to the future is together, and we have to figure out how to do it. And this was hopefully a demonstration of a way to do it.
Dr. Rashaad Newsome, thank you so much for joining me on an episode of Everything is Connected.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
This was great. That was my episode with Dr. Rashaad Newsome. Thank you so much, Rashaad, for joining me on the show. And it's a wrap, folks. That was our episode of Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected. Conversations on culture and current events with some of today's hottest creative contemporaries. These episodes are recorded remotely and on location wherever in the world that I find myself, whether that be Africa, the US, Europe, the Middle East, or the Caribbean. Depending on where I am at the time of these recordings, you will hear the sights and the sounds of my local environment. I look forward to continuing these wonderful conversations with you, with artists and creative professionals across a variety of industries. I'm your host, Folasade Ologundudu, and we'll see you next time. As always, stay motivated, stay inspired, and stay up. Peace and love, y'all. We out.